rapid advances in aerospace technology, there is a pressing need for pilots to test the new aircraft. This video ordnance program takes a look at the most famous test center in the world, Edwards Air Force Base, and its elite corps of test pilots. Located on the vast, dry lake beds of Southern California's Mojave Desert, Edwards Air Force Base has been a center for U.S. Air Force aircraft tests since the end of the Second World War. The Air Force's first jet fighter, a Bell XP-59, was the first aircraft tested here. Formally founded in 1955, the base was the center for early supersonic tests, including Chuck Yeager's first successful flight to break the sound barrier. Today, Edwards Air Force Base is the home of the Air Force Flight Test Center, primary facility for evaluating new Air Force aircraft. All new Air Force aircraft are tested here, including the new B-2 stealth bomber. The reasons for selecting Edwards are obvious. The desert offers vast areas of uninhabited land. The dry lake beds forming the floor of the desert valleys are an ideal basis for runways. The Southern California desert weather permits flying year-round with very few interruptions from rain or weather conditions. Sharing the facilities at Edwards is the Air Force Test Pilot School. The school is the primary source for the test pilots who fly the experimental new aircraft examined by the Air Force at Edwards. The challenge of test flying attracts many of the finest Air Force pilots. The current head of the test pilot school was himself a test pilot and then a shuttle astronaut.
We have a lot of applications from a lot of incredibly sharp people that want to come here. This is viewed as a very competitive position that a lot of people want to come do. It's not for everybody. Some people like staying in the operational side of the flying business, but a lot of people really, this has been, when I was a young fighter pilot, this was my big goal, was to come to test pilot school. And there's still a lot of young pilots out there who view this the same way.
The nature of modern test flying demands not only flying experience, but considerable scientific and engineering training. The role of the test pilot is not merely to fly the aircraft, but to carefully monitor the aircraft and all its complex electronic systems.
One of the requirements to get into test pilot school is you must have a degree in engineering, physics, or mathematics. In my particular case, I had a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and a master's in aeronautic engineering. They would like for you to have flown two different types of aircraft, although that's not a requirement. Only one type is a requirement. And I'd flown two types at that time, 38s and 141s. And typically, the like for the multi engine guys to have 1,500 hours or more, and the fighter guys to have 1,000 hours or more. And I had 2,300 hours when I was selected to attend test pilot school.
The way the Air Force does it, I can't speak for the Navy and other services, but the Air Force, you need a technical background, you apply for pilot training, and all the records of the people that apply go for a board, and they pick a few people as candidates. And then you come out for a flight evaluation, a small flight evaluation program. Used to call it a 5-flight eval, where you fly approximately 5 flights in a non-familiar airplane. I was current in F-4s when I came here, so I flew my 5-flight eval in T-38s. And they want to see how well you adapt to an unfamiliar environment, and then still run through the things on the card that you need to do and do them at least relatively well, and how you handle yourself. And it's also a good chance for the prospective pilot himself to come out to Edwards and take a look at the program and see if it's really what he wants to do.
The Air Force can be very selective of its new test pilots, since there are only 25 slots available in each class. The test pilot course costs the Air Force almost $1 million per student. The demand for strong engineering and science backgrounds stems from the growing complexity of modern aircraft.
The past 15 to 20 years have been very high academic background requirements for the school to actually be competitive to get in. I think it's been a slow evolution since the 50s as airplanes have become more and more technology complicated over the years. We need that higher background education. Some of the students that are going through here today, though, have a much stronger academic backgrounds than I went through, and some of the flight techniques that they're learning are much more complicated than what I learned many years ago. The new fly-by-wire aircraft technologies that we have require a much deeper understandings in the mathematics and the technology behind them in order to be a good evaluator of how they're doing.
Once selected for test pilot school, the men and women in each class begin a rigorous one-year program. The program brings in pilots who are already familiar with operational flying, but who need to learn new piloting techniques important in test programs. The student test pilots are also taught aerodynamic theory to help prepare them to carry out their test flights. The pilots in the class include fighter pilots, as well as heavy aircraft pilots, bombers, and transports. Besides the two categories of pilots, the class will also contain flight engineers and navigators, who will be responsible for other aspects of the test program.
Yeah.
No matter what the background or specialty, the students face the same rigorous training standards.
S+2, because it's in the left half point.
The day is divided up into two halves. The morning is flying and the afternoon is academic. So we have two flying periods in the morning. Now a student will probably fly a couple to 3 times a week. So otherwise his time that's free time when he's not flying in the morning. However, I'll explain free time in a second. The afternoon we have 3 hours of academics each day where we actually teach them the coursework required to learn the objectives that we have here at the school. Now, during that free time in the mornings and their free time in the evenings, we keep them pretty busy with studying for the academics and preparing for their flights, writing their test cards of what the flight's going to be. And then after they go up and actually gather data, they need to reduce the data, analyze it, and then prepare their reports, both written and oral reports. So it's a very busy year for the students here at the Test Pilot School. That's the pilots, the navs, and the engineers, of course, all working together.
For combat pilots familiar with the day-to-day routine of regular squadron life, the return to the classroom can be tough. The courses are very demanding.
The absolute worst part is the 1 year of test pilot school. And by worst, I don't mean it's what I've strived for, it's what I wanted to do, but it was extremely difficult. I worked my tail off getting through. Academically, the flying itself was probably the best way to describe it. It's not quite as much fun as it used to be. Actually going out in a four-ship, going to the range or going to the working area for air-to-air, that was a lot of fun. With these missions, the amount of work you put into it, planning them and all, and you go up single ship, you run through what could be called as a little bit of mundane, it takes a different mindset. You have to really concentrate, and the rewards are totally different than they were in the operational field. But that, as far as transition, I'd say that 1 year at test pilot school is the biggest single thing that's what I would call transition. And it gets your mind straight for sure for the things that are coming up in your operational testing unit.
The runways and taxiways at Edwards Air Force Base are constantly abuzz with the sound of aircraft. Through the morning, T-38 jet trainers take off, giving the test pilot candidates an opportunity to escape the classroom for a few hours. Sharing the runways are experimental and training aircraft from NASA's nearby Ames-Dryden Research Facility. The distinctive white and blue paint schemes of the NASA birds stand out from the military garb of the Air Force aircraft. One sight that is especially familiar at Edwards is the distinctive orange and white paint scheme of the base's chase aircraft. The Flight Test Center uses a variety of aircraft to help support its testing mission. These aircraft are used in a wide variety of roles. They sometimes serve as chase planes, following an aircraft that is being tested to monitor the progress of the flight. Chase aircraft can be fitted with special instrumentation and camera pods to help collect data during the course of the test. Many different types of aircraft are used by the Flight Test Center in the chase plane role. Two of the steady performers have been the A-7 Corsair and the F-4 Phantom. The A-7 Corsair II is a Vietnam-era ground attack aircraft. The A-7 continues to serve in Air National Guard units in the ground attack role. But here its role leans towards the scientific. The A-7's stablemate in the Vietnam years was the F-4 Phantom fighter. The F-4 remains in service at Edwards, its two-seat configuration lending itself conditions where an extra pair of hands are needed. A third veteran aircraft type still in service is the T-37 Tweety Bird, a twin-seat training aircraft. The latest addition to the Flight Test Center's fleet is the F-16 Fighting Falcon. The F-16 is one of the Air Force's premier combat aircraft in the fighter and ground attack role. Here at Edwards, it is becoming one of the most significant new chase plane types as the older aircraft are gradually retired. The task of test pilots is not simply to fly the latest jets. Aircraft which have already been in service for some years, such as the F-15 and F-16, undergo periodic upgrades to improve their performance. For example, a new computer might be added to their flight controls. An aircraft might be adapted to fire a new type of missile. The F-16 Combined Test Force is one of the most active elements of the Edwards test effort, representing about 40% of the Flight Test Center's missions in 1991. But it is not the only type. This AC-130U Spectre gunship is a new version of the AC-130 series, with many improvements over the older model. Once new features are added, it's necessary to test all these aircraft types to make certain that the improvements work properly.
The airplanes don't stay stagnant. Even the F-4, when I was operational, there were always new things that they were coming out to either put on or build into the airplane. The fighters don't stay stagnant. As technology improves for the potential threat, then you need to counter their new technology with some new ideas of your own. So that new equipment needs to be tested properly. Make sure that the user, in this case the tactical pilot, gets what is not only he's paying for, if you will, what the taxpayers are paying for, but that equipment's safe to operate, and it'll operate as designed and as advertised. Things that the F-15 and F-16 community could be testing currently at Edwards are not only new avionics, which is kind of primarily what I just addressed, new radar units or new software tapes to the radar units that they might have on board, but new weapons, and possibly some new flight control laws that might help the way the airplane handles. And that's really brought into keen focus, if you will, in the F-16 program here at Edwards. The F-16 test force is one of our busiest test forces as far as number of sorties, number of hours per month. And that airplane's been around for quite a while, but there's so many new things that they're doing to it right now to make the airplane better for the line user. The high AOA program, high angle of attack, slow speed testing is ongoing. And that is a real involved series of tests that are required when you put new ordnance on board to make sure that it's safe to fly past certain angles of attack. And to help really reduce the restrictions that are placed on the line pilot, to give him a better fighter.
Sharing the runway at Edwards are also a number of fundamentally new aircraft. The C-17 transport aircraft is one of these. As was evident in Operation Desert Shield, airlift is a very important ingredient in modern military engagements. The current airlift fleet, including the C-130, the C-141 and the C-5, are getting old and have certain limitations. The C-17 is intended to modernize the airlift command and improve the ability of the Air Force to deliver combat loads anywhere in the world.
The C-17 is an airlifter that's designed to be both strategic and tactical. and to do direct delivery into the combat airfields. Current airframes, airlifters have to go from, let's say, from the States to a big base in Europe and transfer the cargo load to 130s of trains or trucks to get it to the combat troops that need it. Well, with the C-17, we can just take it from the States direct to the troops that need it out in the field. And that prevents a lot of delay in transportation and also gets it to troops sooner. So we are a much more effective unit fighting out in the field.
The C-17 test program has focused on determining how well the aircraft can perform its intended mission. Edwards is a familiar location for Colonel London, who served an earlier tour at the test pilot school as an instructor, teaching courses in aeroelasticity.
One of the first things we have to do is certify that the aircraft is airworthy, and we did that actually on the first flight. But after that, we determine the limits of the aircraft, the operational limits, how high can it go, how fast can it go, how slow, what's the max roll rate, what's the max bank angle, max pitch attitude. All these things are to be determined. Further in the test program, we look at how far down the runway we have to go, the max gross weight to rotate. One of the things to sign up to is being able to take off the max gross weight of 580,000 pounds in less than a 8,000-foot runway, and land with a max cargo load of 167,000 pounds and a 3,000-foot strip, and then take off again and go to a base back 500 nautical miles away. So that'll put your landing weight somewhere in the vicinity of 460,000 pounds in a 3,000-foot strip, which is pretty impressive in aviation today.
The Air Force test pilots in multi-engine aircraft like the C-17 sometimes share the cockpit with civilian test pilots. The C-17 is manufactured by McDonnell Douglas, and its test pilots are included in the program due to their familiarity with the earlier phases of the design and development effort.
The contractors, the test pilots they have are required by regulation to have attended either the Naval or the Air Force test pilot school, and they have in the past, all the guys we have. The mix when we fly right now is always a Douglas test pilot and an Air Force test pilot in an airplane. And we swap seats. You know, if I fly right seat today, the next mission I fly left seat. And the same with the contractor pilots. So it's truly a mix. It's a team effort to get the testing completed.
The C-17 test program has set new records with over 30 test flights in the first 100 days of test flying. New techniques in computer-assisted aircraft design make aircraft testing a less dangerous and less risky venture than it was at the dawn of the jet age. But at the same time, it has reshaped the requirements for test pilots, demanding a rare blend of piloting skill and engineering savvy. As good as the current generation of fighters are, both the F-15 and the F-16 designs will be nearly 20 years old soon. The Air Force hopes to replace them later in the decade with the Advanced Tactical Fighter, the ATF. Edwards Air Force Base has been the center for testing the new design. The ATF program began in 1981. The program was a competitive development effort with two industrial teams designing two different aircraft, the YF-22 and the YF-23, to meet the Air Force requirements. The Air Force was looking for major breakthroughs in two areas of fighter design compared to the older F-15 Eagle. First, they wanted the new fighter to incorporate as many stealth features as possible without compromising the aircraft's performance. Earlier stealth aircraft, such as the F-117, were really ground attack aircraft not intended to dogfight with other aircraft. The earlier stealth configurations, as on the F-117, were ill-suited to a fast, maneuverable fighter. So a new generation of stealth technology was needed. Stealth is intended to reduce the aircraft's visibility on enemy radar screen. This is critical in modern dogfighting. Radars give fighters the ability to see one another beyond the human eyesight, and radar is used to guide long-range missiles against opposing fighters. By reducing radar visibility, the stealth fighter pilot can see his opponent first and shoot him down with long-range missiles before the opponent's radar can spot the stealth aircraft. In pilot's lingo, stealth gives the fighter first look, first kill, the ability to spot the enemy first and shoot him down first. second major technological breakthrough for the ATF was dubbed Super Cruise. To reach supersonic speeds, current fighters must use their afterburner. This boosts the power of their engines, but at the cost of higher fuel consumption. Super Cruise promises to offer supersonic flight at the lower level of engine power, called military power, rather than at the higher level with afterburner.
What you address is what we term as super cruise, the ability for the airplane to cruise supersonically without using afterburner. The real benefit there in super cruise, the way I look at it, is probably twofold. It allows me to get from A to B faster with hopefully a reduced amount of fuel burn. But the biggest benefit, I think, is reducing my threat envelope while perhaps expanding the vulnerability envelope of potential enemies. What can happen when I super cruise as far as reducing my own threat envelope, and there's several things that play into that, are if I'm in military power below, not afterburner, then one would guess my IR signature, infrared signature of the airplane's reduced. So that one factor would reduce some of my threat envelope. Also, the speed, as it increases, allows less time for threats, either airborne or ground threats, to acquire me, less time and distance that I'm actually in their envelope if it's a ground site, and that whole cone of vulnerability starts shrinking. So that's probably the biggest benefit. One thing that the F-22 is stressing is not only to be able to cruise supersonically, but also to perform there. If we needed to brake turn or do a rapid pointing maneuver to aim at another airplane for some reason, I still have the ability to maneuver the airplane, roll the airplane, and build up some G on the airplane supersonically. And hopefully the F-22 will be able to do that quite a bit better than current generation fighters.
Both the YF-22 and YF-23 were put through their paces at Edwards to see if they met the demanding requirements for a new ATF fighter design. Both designs satisfied the requirements. In 1991, the YF-22 design was selected as the winning contender for the Air Force's new fighter. The F-22 remained in test at Edwards to finalize the design before further development and production could begin. Each of the test missions must be meticulously planned to make certain that every last bit of data can be wrung out. Only a handful of prototypes are in existence. The loss of a single one of them could set the program back by months. Colonel Rickerson describes a typical test mission for the F-22.
As a tester, a typical YF-22 mission, we would start out early in the morning of the day of. Obviously, a lot of time and effort went in a previous day mission planning. But the day of, we get together in a mass briefing, probably 50 or so contractors and Air Force representatives at the briefing, going over every aspect of the briefing. This is still early in the developmental testing of the F-22, so a lot of effort has gone into planning and making every detail of the flight very precisely controlled. When we're finished with this briefing, then we have a smaller group of individuals to get together, the actual flight themselves, and brief up specific portions of the mission. Run out to the airplane, crank up, and taxi not very far from here out to the main runway, blast off, and the actual takeoff will normally be preceded by the chase airplane doing a takeoff. We chase the YF-22 missions with either an F-15 or an F-16. He'll take off first, do kind of a small circuit, and do what's called an airborne pickup on myself. I'd release brakes on his call, and then about the time I rotate and actually lift off, he joins up, checks over my configuration, raise the gear, and going out to about a 2.5-hour sortie generally. What we've been doing lately is mostly loads testing, a lot of vibroacoustics testing on board the airplane. We'll gradually go into more aeroelasticity testing, flutter, and finish it up, this small test program that we're in right now, finish it up with some weapons testing. Hopefully a launch of an AIM-9 Sidewinder in the May time frame.
For all the advanced features incorporated into the F-22 design, there was some worry that it might be too much for the pilot to handle once it finally reaches squadron service. The test pilots not only have to determine whether the aircraft flies as intended, but whether the interface between man and machine succeeds.
Definitely a lot is unique to the airplane. As far as flying it, getting in, cranking it up, well, I shouldn't say cranking it up, but as far as taking off, flying the airplane, turning left, turning right, climbing and descending, the good news is it handles just like you would want an airplane to handle. The average guy that could fly a Cessna with a little practice, very little practice at all, wouldn't have any trouble flying an F-22. The basic thing of watching your airspeed on final is still critical, but that's not that difficult to do, and it's not a difficult airplane at all to fly, and it's designed that way. It's not supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to be easy to fly. Flying the airplane, the basic airplane, is second nature, and now I'm worried about the mission a lot more. I'm spending my time worrying about the people that are out there as a threat, people that perhaps are behind me as a threat. And that's what the airplane's set up to do. As far as transitioning from F-4s, F-15s, and I've flown both those quite a bit, F-16s as well, and the F-22, it's probably best described as a change in onboard avionics. The avionics themselves are getting much more sophisticated. What you can do as far as the different radar modes, detecting the threat, being able to provide the pilot with not just a lot of data from different places, but real information that's already been processed. That's a real key to what the F-22 is going towards. And that's the biggest difference. It's not the stick and throttle itself and the actual performance of the airplane, although the performance of the F-22 is getting better and better, or I should say as fighters progress, of course, the performance is getting better, but I'd say the biggest leap in advancement is onboard avionics.
The popular image of the test pilot is a bold adventurer pitting his wits against a dangerous aircraft on a risky mission. Times are changing in the world of airplanes, and the right stuff is changing too. Flying ability is no longer enough. It takes extraordinary skills to be in the elite ranks of today's top test pilots.